All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. I want you to close your eyes for a quick second and picture this. A foggy, completely abandoned village. You wake up early one morning, step outside, and slowly realize that an entire community has gone completely, literally silent. The wind's blowing, sure, but there are absolutely no footsteps, no voices, zero signs of life anywhere.
Just picture it. The houses are still standing there, perfectly intact. You walk up to one, and the front door is just left wide open. You peek inside, and everyday objects are sitting exactly where they were left just hours before. Plates are still on the table, coats are hanging on their hooks, but the people, they're just gone, without a single warning. There's no obvious disaster, absolutely no signs of a struggle, just total emptiness.
And, well, that brings us to the core mystery, doesn't it? It's the exact thing that's fascinated historians and explorers for decades. When we're staring at a perfectly preserved but entirely empty settlement, we kind of have to ask one simple, haunting question. Where on earth did everyone go? Today, we're going deep into one of the strangest mysteries surrounding abandoned settlements to figure out what the clues are actually telling us.
Chapter 1, The Silent Village. Let's get into it.
Now, at first glance, you might be thinking, well, people leave places all the time, right? Wars happen, economies tank, populations shift. But as we're going to see, these particular settlements don't look like places people slowly and deliberately packed up and moved away from. No, they look totally frozen in time. Look at the sheer mundanity of these clues. We aren't looking at ruined structures here. We're looking at a chair pushed back from a table, an old cooking pot still sitting on a cold stove, a child's toy just dropped right in the middle of the floor, a door that was never properly closed against the wind. These items strongly suggest that ordinary, everyday life literally stopped mid-sentence. When you walk through a place like this, you aren't just looking at old buildings, you're looking at the abruptly interrupted remains of people's lives.
Moving on to Chapter 2, Why Leave?
So, like any good historical detective, before we jump to wild conclusions, let's look at the grounded, logical reasons that typically force families to flee their homes for larger towns or cities. When we look at typical historical migrations, we can usually point to one of four main triggers. You've got environmental change, like, say, a vital river or a forest just vanishes. Then there's economic collapse, where the jobs, trade, and food supply completely dry up. Then we have conflict, right? Wars and territorial disputes that displace whole communities. And finally, natural disasters, like sudden earthquakes or floods that really don't give people much time to escape. Now, these usually explain an abandonment perfectly, but here's where our silent village becomes so incredibly compelling. The evidence on the ground? It just doesn't perfectly match any of these neat little boxes.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, The Strange Clues.
Because when you actually look closely at these abandoned homes, the standard historical explanations start to show some really serious cracks. Inside, you find tools, heavy furniture, and deeply personal objects, but absolutely zero sign of a hurried, chaotic evacuation. So the absolute crucial point is this haunting paradox. If they actually had warning to pack up and leave, say because the local economy was failing or a drought was setting in, why didn't they take everything with them? A family moving to a new city takes their valuable tools, their family heirlooms, their cooking pots. They don't just walk out the front door entirely empty-handed, you know?
Now, to be fair, people do leave worthless or overly heavy things behind all the time when they move. That's totally normal. But notice the distinction here. When an entire settlement shows the exact same eerie signs, literally every single house leaving everything behind simultaneously, the whole story becomes much, much harder to explain as a simple migration. It implies a coordinated, incredibly sudden event.
Okay, Chapter 4, Theories.
Naturally, a dark, cinematic mystery like this acts like a total magnet for human imagination. An unexplained void of information just attracts a huge variety of theories, ranging from the highly logical to the completely, wonderfully extraordinary. When historians and locals try to fill in the blanks, they usually cycle through a familiar list. Some suggest a sudden disease forced the whole population out into quarantine. Others think, hey, maybe the local food or water supply suddenly became tainted and unsafe. Then you have the more conspiratorial theories, secret government activity forcing a quiet, off-the-books evacuation. And inevitably, because we as human beings just love a good spooky story, the tales drift into myths of ghosts, ancient curses, or completely unexplained paranormal phenomena.
But as an explainer grounded in facts, we really have to remember this vital distinction. A mystery is not proof of the supernatural. Just because we don't currently have the exact answer to why the village emptied out doesn't automatically mean the answer is paranormal. Our real challenge here is separating what we can definitively prove from what we simply want to believe, just because it makes for a killer campfire story.
Chapter 5. A Darker Possibility.
Let's actually slow down for a second, because there's a twist here in the data. It's a darker, much more grounded possibility that, in a lot of ways, is way more unsettling than any ghost story you could ever invent. Sociologists call this phenomenon the slow fade. What if there was no dramatic, single night of disappearance? Look at this timeline. Phase 1, it starts quietly, right? Young people moving away to bigger cities looking for work. Then, Phase 2, with fewer people, the local economy weakens, the school closes, the general store shuts its doors for good. Finally, Phase 3, the older residents, unable to sustain the town alone, eventually just leave to follow their kids. It is a quiet, agonizing process that literally takes years, leaving a village completely hollowed out until absolutely nobody is left.
And honestly, that's where the true horror lies. It isn't aliens or monsters. It's this right here. The village didn't vanish. Its people simply stopped coming back. It shows how easily, silently, and tragically a once vibrant community can just bleed out over time. It's a very real, very human kind of disappearance.
Which leads us into Chapter 6, What Happened?
So even with the slow fade theory making a ton of logical sense, the uncomfortable truth is that for a lot of these specific frozen-in-time settlements, we may actually never know the complete, undeniable story of these missing villagers. We can see step by step how historical truth simply gets lost to time. First, the physical records disappear. Papers rot, buildings collapse. Second, as the original generations pass away, memories fade and details get fuzzy. Third, what was likely just a simple, albeit sad, economic migration begins to morph into a local legend. And finally, a mundane tragedy becomes a full-blown ghost story, permanently obscuring whatever real human drama actually took place there.
Today, these places are basically fascinating time capsules. The walls remain entirely intact, the roads are still perfectly paved, the belongings are still sitting exactly where they were left. But the voices, the actual lifeblood of the community, they are completely gone, swallowed up by the silence of the surrounding landscape.
And that brings us right back to the central friction of this whole explainer. Even if we accept the slow fade theory of economic decline, we're still left staring at that child's toy on the floor and the cooking pot on the stove. There's this deep, unsettling conflict between a slow, natural migration and the physical evidence of abandoned, everyday items. Perhaps the absolute greatest mystery isn't necessarily where they went, but this question right here. How can an entire community disappear, whether slowly or quickly, while leaving almost everything behind for us to find? Maybe someday a forgotten document will reveal the exact truth. Or maybe the answer has been sitting quietly inside those abandoned houses all along, just waiting for someone to look closely enough.
As we slowly pull away from this empty village today and leave it to its profound silence, I want to turn it over to you. Looking at the strange clues, the historical triggers, and the extremely eerie reality of what's left behind, what do you think happened?